Thanks, Ron John. It's a real pleasure, and I'm looking forward to especially the conversation afterwards. So to be the leader, in order to jump right in, I got to ask this question, what does leading mean? And if you're a geek, as I sometimes am, and you do a little bit of research, you'll find out that the original words that came to us using in English the word lead meant to shoulder the load, to show the way, to shoulder the load, to show the way. Maybe we could put that in more modern language of to take responsibility for giving guidance. The reason I use that is because way too often we think about leadership as position, title, formality, hierarchy. But in fact, anytime you're the person at whatever level that you are taking that responsibility, shouldering the load to show others the way, then you're a leader and you're leading. Better still, sometimes I work with people who talk a lot about collaborative process. And in collaborative process, we might actually think of ourselves as alternating leadership. If we're peers, I may take a lead, you may take a lead. Whoever takes the responsibility for moving things forward is in the leadership role. So I do that because it's important to just completely blow up this idea that leadership is about title or position. It has nothing to do with that. Some of the most remarkable stories of leadership have absolutely nothing to do with formal leadership. And in fact, I'll share one of those stories on the back end. But first, let me do this. Let me talk about what it is to be the leader. There are 4 primary roles that any leader must have their eyes on. And at the end, I will drop a document into the chat so that you all can take a look at it. It will be useful to you if you download it. The first of these is you must set direction and clarity. Direction and clarity. The reason is because the evidence of humanity is that we don't follow very well, none of us, if we don't know where we're going. In fact, some of us become quite reticent and or obstructive. The best example of this, excuse me, the best example of this that most of us have ever heard actually comes from the Apollo Moonshot back in 1963, when John F. Kennedy said, by the end of this decade, we're going to put a man on the moon. It's absolutely clear. We know when we're aiming for. There's lots and lots and lots of questions about how we're going to do that. But it's very clear what we're trying to achieve. So direction is very clear. We know where we're bound. This is an entertaining one for me because my dad was an engineer on the lunar module for that first moonshot. And so he told me many stories about all the geeks doing all the stuff, trying to madly figure out how to do it. But you see, you don't have to know how to do it. You just have to know where you're going, which sets up the second point, which is the right people in the right seats on your bus, a bus to the moon, perhaps. Here's why. Assuming you've got really good people and they're in the right positions for whatever it is you're trying to do and wherever it is you're trying to go, here's what the research shows. Good people will figure it out and they will get you there. If you've watched the movie Hidden Figures, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That movie is filled with examples of talented, smart people figuring it out. Everything from heat shields to mathematics. Here's what the research tells us, and this is really remarkable. 9 out of 10 so-called people problems aren't a problem with the person. It's true whether you're a student, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a facilitator, strategist like me. It turns out that 9 out of 10 personnel problems are because the person is not a good fit for the setting. Either the work they do or the nature of the culture that they find themselves in. So when we find ourselves in career counseling and so forth, it is often far, far less about what skills you have, although skills are necessary. It's about whether or not you're a right fit for the position. And I actually tested this out once for myself and found out that when I understood my basic orientation, my strengths, If my strengths are expressed, I last. If my strengths aren't, I don't last. I just can't see it through. So this idea of fit, this idea of being in the right place, the right seat. So if you think about this from a leadership point of view, if I've been clear about where we're going and people understand it, and if I've got the right people, I've got the magic elixir for actually getting there. Point number 3. This is called, in geek speak, I do a lot of work in public health, and the geek speak in public health is the ecological model. Now, what that means is that if you don't have a culture around this high performer, they won't succeed. I know in our culture, we love to talk endlessly about individual initiative, individual responsibility. And I don't mean to say that's not important. I mean to say that what the research shows is that unless the things around you support the behavior that will get you to the place you're aiming for, your chances of success are actually quite slim. It's why we care so much, like in an educational setting, with all the things we create in the soup of an educational setting so that students have an opportunity to thrive. One of my favorite ones, because of the work I do in public health, is the classic story about mothers who are bad moms. One of the favorite ones is bad moms get criticized all the time for giving their kid crappy food. Well, if you really look closely, those moms very likely are working more than 40 hours a week. They're very likely in what we call a food desert, which means they're going to have to get on public transit to get somewhere. They're going to have to schlep that stuff in plastic bags or cotton bags. Worse still, when they get there, the food that is easily affordable to fill up a belly is usually not high quality food. A good head of romaine lettuce may be $4. You can buy like 10 boxes of macaroni and cheese for $4. That doesn't mean macaroni and cheese is a good nutritional option. It means it fills up hungry bellies. So here you've got a mom who might want to really take care of her kids, but the ecological systems around her make it impossible for her to be successful. So if you're a leader, you can't just hire the right people or develop the right people. You have to build this ecology around them. You have to build a culture that allows them to fulfill their potential, else they will not. It's one of the hardest part of leadership is trying to figure out what do you need to do to build in a culture, and people spend hours and hours and hours thinking about an organizational setting, a school setting, a community setting. What does it take to give people that support that they need? Now, the 4th piece is my favorite part. The first 3 allow you as a leader to spend more and more of your time on what we call resource generation. Now, that's not just money. In fact, the best work in the world is done using other people's money and other people's people. What that means is the leader, once they've got direction clear, once they've got the right people either there or in the process, once they've begun building that culture that lets those people be successful, the successful leader becomes an influencer, begins to think about how I get more people, more money, more political will, more community interest and involvement, because that's ultimately how we make things happen. It's the old many hands make light work analogy. And the leader who gets those early stages done can then spend his or her time thinking about how to get more resources in the game. My favorite example of this also comes from public health. I don't know what happens in your local community, but I'm going to bet you a lot of work has been done to protect people from secondhand tobacco smoke. I've done a lot of work for 20 years in tobacco use prevention. And what's really brilliant about this is the formula for how you create smoke-free environments is the same formula. We have the evidence, we know how it works, we know how to make it work in a community. Well, here's the beauty of it. Much of that work was done funded through the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. It happens to be one of my clients, which is why I know this space well. But the CDC and the Congress don't have enough money to do it everywhere it needs. So secondhand smoke work, the prevention of exposure, is done with other people, usually coalitions and communities, usually using local resources, usually getting money from states and communities and counties. And then what happens, this is where it really comes to fruition, when China, of all places, decided they needed to stop the exposure of people to tobacco smoke, they used the exact same playbook that was first developed in California, Florida, New York, and Minnesota, but they used their own resources. So the leaders of the CDC didn't have to pay Beijing to do this good work. Beijing devoted their resources to using the same evidence base that was created. So the greatest way to create impact, let's put that in a little more practical realm. I'm sure all of you have intimate familiarity with Amazon. Well, like it or hate it, Amazon has created a remarkable resource generation design. Essentially, you can plug most anything into it now, and mostly you can get most anything out of it now. So it was built to generate resources and to make things happen. So if you want to, think of this as leverage. So here's the leadership formula. Got to know where you're going, and people got to understand it, else they can't follow. Number two, you got to be thinking about the right people in the right positions, because fit is everything. Number three, you have to be mindful about the culture, the environment in which those people are trying to be successful, because they can't be successful unless the environment supports it. And number four, your ultimate value is in generation of resources, making things happen. So I promised you that I would tell you a story to close. And I'm going to bet you none of you have heard of Ryan Hurljack. Show of hands. Anybody heard of Ryan Hurljack? Yeah, that's what I thought. Nobody ever knows about Ryan Hurljack, which is why I love the example. It totally blows up the idea that it's somebody we know and they wear a uniform or something like that. Well, when Ryan was in primary school, he's a Canadian kid. When he was in primary school, he found out that millions of people in Africa don't have access to safe drinking water. So Ryan said to his dad, I'd like to raise some money and help them get drinking water. And he did. He sent a few $100 in. He got this lovely letter from the not-for-profit in Africa. And they said, thank you very much. This pays for, a part of a well. Turns out a well costs several $1,000s. So Ryan, still in primary school, says, Dad, I'd like to raise enough for a well, which turns out to be like almost 10 grand. His dad kind of discouraged him because he wasn't sure Ryan could be successful. But yes, you guessed it. Ryan raised that money and they drilled a well in his name. By now he was in middle school. Well, Ryan, being a visioner, can you hear the direction piece of this? Ryan says, Dad, I wonder how much a drilling rig costs. Okay, this is a kid in middle school wondering how much a drilling rig. Well, it turns out it's about $250,000. His dad did not want to support him because that's a lot of money. But anybody want to bet what happened? Yeah. Ryan raised $250,000 to buy a drilling rig so that thousands of wells could be drilled. But that wasn't enough. When Ryan was 18 years old, he created the Ryan's Water Foundation, a not-for-profit. That foundation that he created at the age of 18 has now for more than a decade been funding and drilling thousands of wells, providing water to millions of people across Africa. And Ryan went on to college, got his degree, and he's gone off to do other things because he finished the work he set out to do. And that foundation continues to this day. I share that closing leadership story for several reasons. One is because Ryan does not fit any conception most of us have of what a leader might look like. Number two, he started so young that it's awe-inspiring to me. Every time I tell the story, what happens inside of me is I say to myself, Ron, you need to do more. If a kid in primary school can end up producing water for millions of human beings, you can do more, no matter what you're facing. And the other reason I share that is especially because of you, my audience. I'm assuming that you're involved in this speaking work and that you're here today because you too would like to make something happen in the world. Well, let me suggest to you that if Ryan Hurljack could do that, I have great hopes for what you can do by being leaders and making things happen in this world, because the world needs what you have. Your job is to figure out how to manifest it.